Okay, I'm gonna spare you my usual preamble and prose about video games. Let's cut right to the chase. Hi-Fi Rush rules.
But when the music kicks in, it feels like I'm on a stage.
For those uninitiated in the recent boom of popularity in this game, you may be asking, Perry, what the hell is Hi-Fi Rush? And well, the short answer is that Hi-Fi Rush is a character action rhythm game, where you beat up enemies in combat rooms to the beat of the music, and occasionally sprinkle in some traditional rhythm and platforming stuff in between. And now for the regulars here, it should be no surprise that I love this game. I love rhythm games, I love character action games, so to see a beautiful, hyperactive bombshell fusion of the two, it feels like a lovely little parfait of a game that was specifically made for me. The act of beating enemies to a pulp, tied to the beat of the music, is just divine. It's polished to a shine, stuffed with personality and content, and I cannot get enough of it. As soon as this video gets done, I'm probably gonna go right back to playing it. Hey! So instead of beating around the bush like usual, I'm just gonna be going over all the game's qualities, and its minor faults, to show how and why this game struck such a chord with me. Because from its style, to its gameplay, to even the story, Hi-Fi Rush really is that good. Also, story-wise, I won't spoil past the first third of the game, but I will be showing biomes from all across the game, as well as a brief smattering of post-game content, okay? Tango Gameworks is an interesting studio, founded by the one and only GOAT Shinji Mikami, who both directed and wrote Resident Evil 4.
Your right hand comes off?
They started out doing horror games, specifically The Evil Within 1 and 2. I don't know much about those yet, I'll play them someday, but it looks like they were fairly well received. But after that and a couple other projects, the studio wanted a little shake-up. So in comes Hi-Fi Rush, and immediately looking at those previous games and then comparing their style to this, it's quite the contrast, huh? But in a way, it was what the company needed. Hi-Fi Rush's director describes the game as something that he's always wanted to make, and a nice palate cleanser to try something new after finishing The Evil Within 2. Nice bars. Because of that, the look of Hi-Fi Rush really stands out in a crowd. Its bombastic style, inspired by Western cartoons and anime alike, makes it a spectacle in motion. Sometimes it can be a bit more of one than the other, though. The thick outlines on models with genuine cell shading, expressive characters, and animating on twos makes the whole thing feel like a comic book come to life at points. Combine that with a rock-infused soundtrack that's full of bangers, and it feels like a 2000s gem of a game that traveled through time and was released years later. In full HD, of course, though that goes without saying. And that's not all the aesthetics are good at, because they're also a hella good base to find the rhythm. Now you may be asking, hey Perry, what do you mean by this? And to that I say, well just wait a minute, I'm building up to it. Almost everything in this game follows the beat of the music. Enemy attacks, the environment, even the way the player character and wannabe rock star Chai walks. Hell, you can see background elements moving to the music as early as the title screen. Not only is that just super cool, but it also works the aesthetics into the gameplay in a genius way. To take another quote from that interview, one of the earliest things we had, and this kind of influenced the direction on our style for how we did things, was the movies that Edgar Wright as a director would make. Music tied to the images very coherently. That's how the idea came to be, many, many years ago when we were still making the original Evil Within. But Hi-Fi Rush finally gave us a chance to pursue that angle. So by taking the aesthetics into account, the player can maybe find their rhythm that way. Whether there's a blinking light or a pulsing waveform in the background, there's always something to help you keep that beat. And I think that's rad. Because of everything else going to the beat, it subconsciously guides and encourages the player to attack, jump, and dash to the beat. That's some big brain game development right there. But I'll go more into the gameplay later. Hell, even the story is pretty decent, which by character action game standards means this game is peak fiction. Sorry to the haters, but them's the breaks. It's just the right amount of corny action cartoon writing. The story centers around wannabe rockstar Chai,
Future Rockstar.
future rockstar Chai, as he teams up with Peppermint and her pet robot cat, 808, to take down Vandelay Corporation and uncover its secrets, beating all the heads of the corporation and making a couple new allies on the way. While some may write it off due to its quippy nature, I found the writing pretty fun, though that may be due to how it sounds like the voice cast had such a blast working with this script. The performances are really energized, and there's a lot of optional dialogue. You can talk with the main cast in your hideout, of course, but there's also hidden characters to find in the levels, and more often than not, you can squeeze an extra line out of an NPC robot by hitting them with your guitar. And those extra lines are all unique.
The jig's up! Becca knows we blew it!
Try this out.
That was harsh. He was just chilling, Peppermint.
One of my favorite little bits of fluff, though, is in the post-game. If you return to track 3, there's a part that's supposed to be a forced fail scenario. But if you use Macaron's assist ability to take down the enemy's shield early, you get an extra conversation about messing up the order of events.
Mr. Chai, some macaron has yet to join you. This is cheating.
Well, this messes everything up.
Do not be afraid. I will activate the cutscene as usual.
God, I love games with soul. That being said, the script isn't just charming and fun. A lot of the time, it's very genuine in its story beats. Games can be funny and have a story with intensity. They just need to know when to take things seriously. And Hi-Fi Rush definitely does. The main cast starts as archetypes, and also Cinema is there, and I love him. But they all fit their roles wonderfully. They have little arcs, and they become a pretty kick-ass team by the end of things. And God, the end of things. No spoilers, of course, but man, that finale is cool. And while most of them aren't as fleshed out, I really liked the Vandelay bosses too. The way that their stages reflect their personalities really helps with that. I'd like to give a special shout out to Zonzo, the JoJo guy I showed earlier. His creative passion butts heads with his hubris throughout his stages, and it's honestly hysterical to watch Chai goad him into wasting his budget on him. This man who thinks he's so on top of the world that he puts cardboard cutouts of himself all around his level is dragged down to bankruptcy by his own ego. It's great. Sure, the story itself is nothing groundbreaking. Taking down a corrupt CEO is always going to be an all-time classic plot, but it takes its cues and does some really fun things with them. And in the modern age of video games, where their stories either subvert tropes for the sake of it, or act like they're above it all, I'll gladly take this. So alright, the presentation's pretty stellar, but all style and no substance makes a game kinda dull in the long run, no? So how's the gameplay? Well, if you've been following along, you know that I think the gameplay is a fucking banger, dude! Much like its presentation, Hi-Fi Rush's gameplay takes things that experienced gamers should be familiar with, but blends them together in such a unique way. And that blend makes it undeniably funky, frenetic, and cool. It's a perfect mix of rhythm game and action game mechanics. It never feels like one side overpowers the other, rather, at all times, one side is seasoning the other. A lot of food metaphors this time. The combat and gameplay are very reminiscent of ventures like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. Combo-focused, combat-heavy games that encourage you to grind your enemies into the dirt. In this game's case, instead of doing so with guns, hair, or swords, you get a makeshift guitar to shred enemies with. That's pretty neat. But add a dollop of rhythm game timing there and you get Hi-Fi Rush's secret spice. Working with the timing and rhythm benefits Chai in many ways. His attacks deal more damage, his dodge is able to be chained up to 3 times in a row, but only if you hit on the beat. Of course, if desired, the player can play a good chunk of the game off beat. It's not too strict, but they'd be missing out on a lot of that superb game feel. And come on, who can deny some good old satisfaction? But hey, if you're bad with timing, or as the kids say, you ain't got rhythm,
But listen what you're doing right there.
there's a pretty decent wealth of accessibility options to work with. I didn't use them personally, but I'm so glad they're there, so as many people as possible can try this game out. The combo-focused style of the action game feeds excellently to the timing-based nature of the rhythm game. Only 2 big timings really need to be drilled into your head while playing. Light attacks take 1 beat, and heavy attacks take 2. So with light attacks it would go 1, 2, 3, 4. But heavy attacks would go 1 beat, 2 beat, 3. I don't know why I tried so hard to convey that when the game kinda does it for me, you know? Keeping that in mind and working to the songs, combos will start racking up like it's nothing. And that's not all on the offensive either. There's assist attacks where you can call in a pal, special attacks when you charge up your meter enough, there's a grapple move that lets you zoom to an enemy whether they're on the ground or in the air, customizable chips for added bonuses, a real parry. It's quite a lot. Might be a little overwhelming to some, but the game teaches it over time rather than dumping it all on the player at once. As Chai, the world is your stage, and on that stage you perform like you never performed before. Which, well, Chai hasn't. But hey, the stages give you plenty of time to test your moves and learn your opponent's moves. Speaking of your opponent's moves, I love that every attack that an enemy does not only has a typical parry flash the beat before they're performed, but also, whether it's a 1, 2, 3 or a pattern to reflect back, there's usually a build-up too. Sorry if it feels like I'm repeating myself a bit, but I can't stress enough just how important rhythm is to the core of this game. If you took it out, well, it just wouldn't be the same. Like a fruit salad with no fruit? Alright, I'm pushing it now. But by using rhythm and learning the ins and outs of the enemies, the game provides prep before the main event of the boss battles. Pretty slick. And whether those bosses be big or small, I don't think there's a bad one in the bunch. They each test a certain aspect of what you've learned. For example, take Rekka, the boss of Track 2. This big, beefy powerhouse of a woman who has pretty easily telegraphed attacks in her first phase before she just goes fucking nuts and powers herself up with electricity. Then it becomes a game of getting in hits where you can, while also making sure you don't get electrocuted. Later in the fight, this electricity turns into a barrier which you use Peppermint's assist to take down. So yeah, it uses both the things you've learned, but it's still fast, frenetic, and fairly tough for being so early in the game. Tracks 7, 10, and 12 have my favorites though. If you know, you know. And goddamn! As if the quality of the content wasn't enough, there's plenty of quantity to go around too. The main campaign took me about 10 to 12 hours, which for an action game is pretty beefy. But even after that, you get bonus missions, hundreds of mini objectives to clean up on the Wall of Fame mural, and the post-game tower mode that's reminiscent of Devil May Cry's Bloody Palace. Beating up mooks until you can't go on any longer. Awesome stuff. I'm not great at the rhythm tower though. It gets tough later on. But of course, even as I talk up the game in this way, I'm aware of its shortcomings. So before I wrap up, how about we go over those? They're nothing deal-breaking, but worth acknowledging all the same. First off, I didn't talk much about the platforming side of the gameplay, and, well, that's because there really isn't much to talk about there. Combine a fast, heavy jump with narrow obstacles and puzzles that don't exactly tease the brain, and at the worst of times, it can feel like padding to an otherwise delightful experience. Of course, these sections do have a lot to look out for, like the aforementioned extra dialogue, upgrades, and little lore documents. But the gameplay here does leave just a little bit to be desired. But you know, even the best of character action games struggle to fill those gaps, so again, it's not a big deal. What is a big deal though, well, big in relation to the previous thing, is that even when replaying stages, the game will still stop you for tutorial stuff. And even non-tutorial stuff, like certain dialogue things, you just kind of have to stop and wait. Most of them are skippable, but there's just enough that aren't that it makes me think, what's the deal here, guys? Oh, also, I really wish there was like a tracker for items. Because the 100% grind has been a bit of a pain when I don't know what levels I have one little thing left in. That can be added in a patch though, hopefully. Nevertheless, even if Hi-Fi Rush does have a few snags, I think it says a lot that even with the snags, this may be my new favorite character action game. With the Shadow Drop release this game was given, Hi-Fi Rush had a lot to prove. And well, in my opinion, I think it proved everything it needed to, even going beyond in some ways. The reception has been immaculate so far, and I couldn't be happier. Rave reviews, glowing endorsements from all kinds of players, and bringing so many people into both rhythm games and character action games. It broke the cycle of doom and gloom that was perpetually spinning around games before it released. And I just cannot thank it enough for that. A genuine banger outperformed the big ol' open world release of January. I also just think it's unbelievable, in a good way, that this game is only $30? With as much content as it has, and how much polish and style is here, it could have easily gone for more. But I'm so glad it didn't, let me clarify that right now. The lower price makes it so much more accessible, and kind of makes it spit in the face of the typical AAA game that goes for more and has less content. Plus, it's also on Game Pass, so if you have that, you can try it for less. Hi-Fi Rush gets my highest recommendation, and my fiest recommendation. Genuinely, I'm so glad this exists, and Tango Gameworks is now on my radar of studios to keep an eye on. This was a hell of a show. Maybe we can get an encore sometime.